Yeah, I'm setting the YouTube side.
So now we're all set. We can start, right?
Wait a few seconds. It's setting up. Okay, now we are good.
Okay. So hello, everyone. Here is Xin Bian speaking from Hangzhou, China, Zhejiang University. So it's my honor to present you today, Dr. Schumann. She now is currently holding a postdoc position in chemical and biomolecular engineering department at the University of Delaware, USA. So University of Delaware, they held one of the best chemical engineering department in US and also in the world. And Dr. Schumann is working with Norman Wagner. I think Wagner is a National Academy of Engineering member. And Dr. Schumann received her PhD from IIT Kanpur, India, 2 years ago. So IIT is also world famous. It's the best in India, also very prestigious institute. There she focused on understanding the microstructure and the viscoelasticity of physical gels. Her research interests also include nanoparticle synthesis and characterization and self-assembly in general in soft matter, and also the structural dynamics of colloidal gels and glasses. So welcome, Dr. Schumann. Now is your stage. Please go on.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Also, thank you to Professor Zen, Professor Lee for organizing this very nice complex fluid soft matter seminar series. I think it's a great platform for everyone to exchange their ideas and to present their research work and to update everyone about what is the current state of the art in the field. And also thank you, Professor Zenli, for inviting me to give this opportunity to give this talk over here. So coming back to the talk, today I'll be talking about developing structure-property relationships in colloidal gels using rheology. So okay. So a brief outline of the talk, what we're going to learn about today is I'll be talking briefly about an introduction about developing how important it is to study the structure and the rheological behavior of colloidal gels. And most of my talk will be divided into two parts. The part one is basically committed to a suspension of adhesive hard spheres, and we study rheological aging behavior in this system and different rheological properties and interesting features which is exhibited by the system. The second part of my talk is going to be focused on disc-like particles, which is very different from the spherical particles, and what are the interesting behaviors shown by this system. So why do we need to study the colloidal gels? So the colloidal gels consisting of the nanoparticle systems are present everywhere around us. A few examples can be seen on this slide, ranging from paints, drilling muds, consumer care goods, products, and cements. The bulk properties of all these materials lies in the underlying microstructures of these materials. So the microstructure, the nanoparticles can be arranged in different forms and exhibit different properties. So it can either be arranged in a form of glass or in the form of gel. The microstructure of the glass and gel is shown using the schematic over here. So although to an eye, both the structures might appear to be very same at bulk level, but at microstructure level, both the structures are very different. While the gel microstructure is purely attractive in nature and it is connected via attractive forces to form a space-spanning percolated network, a gel microstructure can be either attractive or repulsive in nature. And as we can see over here, not necessarily all the particles are sharing a contact force, and these are arrested in this microstructure. So the real example of the gel and glass microstructure is shown using the bottom two images of spherical particles and the right one being of disc-shaped particles, laponite, which we'll be talking more in the later part of the talk. So in order to know more about the nanoparticle gels and colloidal gels in general, the behavior, the ubiquity, it can be found out in the book on Theory and Applications of Colloidal Suspension Rheology by Wagner and Mewis. So with the known popularity of colloidal gels in industry and around us, it becomes very important to study the bulk property and what is the microstructure which governs the bulk property. So with this goal of developing structure and property relationships in colloidal gels, we adapt the following flow diagram to understand the behavior. So firstly, we begin by selection of a good model system, which can be characterized nicely. We design the experiments to understand the bulk properties. We carry out very careful list of experimental studies to gain the experimental parameters. And last but not the least, and one of the most important point in this study is going to be analysis of the experimental behavior. So the characterization tool which we adopt and which I'm going to focus in this talk today is using rheology. So we use rheology, which is the science of flow and deformation of matter, to study the behavior of the materials. So using rheology, we're going to apply some small deformation field, and we're going to understand the structural behavior which it gives us. So a small overview of what rheology gives us. As all of you are already aware, that most of the naturally occurring materials are neither perfectly viscous nor perfectly elastic. So it falls in the domain of viscoelastic, which means that it has both the combination of both the properties, which is viscous and elastic nature. So using rheology, the two main parameters which we get information is G prime and G double prime over here. So G prime is basically the elastic modulus, which tells us about the elastic component of a viscoelastic material, whereas G double prime is the viscous modulus, which tells us about the viscous component of this material. So these two parameters are going to be throughout my talks, so we can just remember this. So with this brief overview, we move to the first part of the talk, which is going to focus on anomalous rheological aging behavior of a model thermoreversible colloidal gel following a thermal quench. So as I stated, the first step is going to be selection of a good system. So the system over here is adhesive hard sphere system, which is abbreviated as AHS. So this is a model gel forming thermoreversible system, which has been very well characterized in the literature. These are 30 nanometer particles of silica, which is coated with octadecane, and it is known to undergo liquid to soft gel transition on decreasing the temperature. It has been widely characterized in the literature using rheology, dynamic light scattering, and scattering neutron scattering study to find out the phase behavior of the material, and it has been presented in the literature using this phase diagram. So the horizontal axis is the increasing volume fraction of the particles of adhesive hard sphere, whereas the vertical axis is the Baxter sticky Baxter parameter, which is basically quantification of the attraction strength of the material. So with decrease in the value of tau b means resulting an increase in the attraction strength in the material. So as we can see, as we increase the attraction strength in the material, the system transforms from a liquid to a gel-like state over here. So these are the different parts in the phase diagram, which is liquid, two-phase region, gel region, the repulsive driven glass, the RDG, and the attractor driven glass. So the green triangles over here are the data points already reported in the literature, which suggests that it undergoes liquid to gel-like transition. So with this very well characterized system in hand, which we have chosen, we now move to understand the rheological behavior of the system. On the left is basically a TEM image of how these particles look like, and you can see these are very small spherical 30 nanometer particles. So in the literature, the system has been studied under shallow quench. That is, since it is a thermoreversible system, a small thermal quench has been given in temperature, and the system has been studied. However, the deep thermal quench is not yet investigated on these systems. And industrially, it can be very commonly a feature that the system is subjected to a deep or sudden change in temperature as opposed to a very gradual change in temperature. Therefore, this leads us to the goal, which is to understand the rheology and microstructure of this thermoreversible colloidal gels at different extents of quenching. So the route which we adopt is using rheometry. So a little bit brief details about how we do the experiments. So we have a TA Instruments DHR3 rheometer, and we use the cone and plate geometry with 40 mm diameter and 1 degree cone angle. We have a temperature control using the Peltier system, which does a very precise control in temperature till 200 degrees centigrade. Now, since this is a thermoreversible gel, it is very convenient to pre-shear the sample by taking it to 40 degree, which is an liquid state for this gel, and we pre-shear it for 2 minutes at a high shear rate. We then apply quenching protocol, which is giving a step down or step change in temperature from the initial temperature, and study the rheological behavior. And all the results which I'm going to report here are for a fixed volume fraction of 0.2. So since I've been telling you a lot that it is a thermoreversible gel, we first try to characterize what is the response of this material to change in temperature. So we take the sample, load it on the rheometer, and give it a very gradual change in temperature as shown in the schematic on the left. We change the temperature gradually at a fixed ramp rate from 40 to 10 degree, and then followed by reheating to the same temperature ends. So 40 degree is basically the liquid-like state, and 10 degree is supposed to be the arrested or the soft solid-like state for this gel substance. So as we increase the temperature, decrease the temperature, and follow the cooling cycle, the blue one, we have the evolution of G prime and G double prime shown on the right graph over here. So the blue one is during the cooling cycle when we decrease the temperature, and then followed by the heating cycle, the red one, which is increase in temperature. Since it is liquid-like at very high temperature, it is shown by the very low value of the modulus over here. And as it undergoes the liquid to soft solid transition, both the modulus intersect at a certain point and then increases rapidly by 5 orders of magnitude to very high value. So on further reheating the sample, it follows the same path for some time and then undergoes an intersection at a different temperature as opposed to the cooling cycle, and again saturates to very low value, which suggests that it is thermoreversible in nature. So now the intersection of G prime and G double prime is also used to characterize the gel point temperature for this specific system in the literature. However, one drawback of this nomenclature is that it is in this case, the temperature of gel point is dependent on the applied frequency. So in order to have accurate characterization of the gel point temperature, we conduct we apply multiple frequencies to the system, which is known as the cyclic frequency sweep experiment. And this idea was proposed by Winter and is widely known as the Winter criteria. So at the point of critical gel transition, when the system forms the weakest space spanning percolated network, both the moduli, the elastic and the viscous moduli, are known to show identical power law dependence on frequency given by the equation over here. So the exponent n is identical for both G prime and G double prime. So in the left graph, we show the evolution of G prime and G double prime as a function of different temperatures. At 27 degree, we can see that G prime follows an omega square dependence and G double prime follows an omega dependence, which suggests like a liquid-like behavior of the gel, of the material, of the suspension. With decrease in temperature to 25.4, we have identical power law dependence of G prime and G double prime. And with further decrease in temperature to 20 degree, a solid-like behavior is dominant, where G prime dominates G double prime throughout the region. The same behavior can be plotted in terms of tan delta, which is a ratio of viscous to the elastic component of the viscoelastic material. Now, since at the point of critical gel transition, both the moduli obeys identical power law dependence, the ratio of the two, which is tan delta, mathematically should become independent of the applied frequency. So on the right curve over here, the different colors of the curves correspond to different frequencies. And as we can see at 25.4 degree, all the tan delta curves intersect at a point and becomes independent of the applied frequency. So therefore, with this experiment, we are able to carefully characterize the critical gel temperature of the system, which is 25.4 degrees centigrade. Now, the value of N, which is the identical power law dependence, can vary from 0 to 1. A value more near to 0 suggests more solid dominant critical gel, whereas a value closer to 1 suggests the more liquid or the viscous dominant gel. So with having characterized the gel point temperature, we now study what happens to this system on subject to a shallow thermal quench. So as I said already, the shallow thermal quench has been studied in the literature. So the objective of doing this experiment is basically to to be consistent with the literature and see if a system is following the literature or not. So when we change the temperature suddenly from 40 degree to 25 degree, where 25 degree is quite close to 25.4, which is the gel point temperature, we see the evolution of modulus as a function of time over here. So we can see that within few seconds, thermal equilibrium is achieved using the Peltier plate system. And initially, the value of modulus is low, which is because of the liquid-like state, and it undergoes intersection at a specific time, and then undergoes a gradual slow increase in the modulus value with an exponent of 0.4. This is consistent with what has been obviously reported in the literature, and this slow growth in the modulus value has been studied to be evolution towards a more final homogeneous structure of the gel. So with having established our results are consistent with the literature, we now move on to proving the system at a deep thermal quench. So in the deep thermal quench, we follow the same protocol of taking the system at 40 degree, the liquid state, and subjecting it to a thermal quench below the gel point temperature, well below the gel point temperature. So in this case, I subject it to 21 degrees centigrade, which is around 4.4 degree below the gel point temperature. The temperature evolution which is happening experimentally is seen in the A figure over here, whereas the corresponding evolution of the modulus is seen in the bottom figure over here. So surprisingly, with increase in the modulus value as it was increasing on subject to shallow quench, with the slow increase is accompanied with a sudden decrease in the modulus value at a certain time, which is indicated by the arrow over here. A zoomed part of this is shown in the insert over here, and we can see that the modulus value decreases by 3 times and then tries to saturate at a particular value. On the other hand, G double prime, which is the viscous component of the material, undergoes a weak overshoot and then also saturates to the material. Now, such a behavior where it shows a sudden drop in the modulus value has not been reported yet in the literature, and is therefore very intriguing to study what happens microstructurally at this specific time and at the specific thermal quench. Now, the first question comes whether it is repeatable and it happens at different thermal quenches or not. So we try to repeat the same experiment at different temperatures lower than the gel point temperatures, namely 16, 17, 22, 23. And we can see that the sudden drop is very much reproducible on different runs, on different quench temperatures as well. So we now go on to have a deeper understanding about what is happening rheologically in the system and what it is trying to say. So initially, when we subject the sample to a quench temperature, which is nearby the gel temperature, let's say 23 degree as shown over here, we see that at a specific time, the modulus undergoes a sudden decrease, which is followed by a slow continual increase in the modulus value. The sudden decrease is very fast and it occurs in a narrow temperature of 8 seconds. So this is the first region which we quantify in the center graph over here, where I plot the transition time as a function of extent to gelation, which is shown by epsilon symbol over here. How do I characterize extent of gelation? So this is basically the difference in the temperature at which I conduct the aging study at a deeper quencher state, which is 23 degree for this specific temperature, and T-gel is 25.4 as we characterized using the winter criteria. So as we perform the rheological aging study on a lower temperature of 17 degree, we see the sudden decrease in the modulus value. However, now there is no continual increase in the modulus value after the transition. However, it can seem to be pretty much be saturated after the transition value. So over here also the drop is quite sudden, which occurs in a narrow interval of 50 seconds over here. On performing the same experiment at very low temperatures, which is 12 degree and which is very far away from the gel point temperature of 25.4, we see that the transition is occurring gradually over here and it takes longer time to transition, and which is followed by a plateau value over here. So the transition takes around 1000 seconds to get completed at very low temperatures. So the transition time is basically quantified in all the temperatures aging experiments and is plotted in the center figure over here as a function of extent of gelation. So now the entire domain is bifurcated into 4 regions. The first region is the shallow region, or the shallow thermal quench region, where we did not observe any sudden decrease in or any drop in the modulus value, and there was a continuous increase in the modulus value, which is generally observed for polymeric gels or colloidal gels in general. However, we now enter the deep quench region, which is region 2, 3, and 4 numbered over here. So in the region 2, we have a drop followed by a continuous increase. In region 3, it is characterized by a sudden decrease, but not a very prominent increase in the modulus value, whereas in region 4, the drop is gradual and then followed by a plateau value. So the different meanings of these regions and what it is proposing will be coming up in the further slides. Also important parameters in all these figures is the value of modulus, which is at the maximum value at the point of transition and at the end of 1 hour of aging study. So we now plot the value of modulus at 3 different stages during the aging study, which is the maximum value, the transition value, and at the end of 1 hour experiment. So as we can see, with increase in the depth of quenching, the value of modulus increases. This is quite expected because as we go deeper and deeper into the temperatures, we are entering into the more arrested regions, which can be manifested by the increase in the modulus value. Specifically, the G prime maximum value goes on increasing quite evidently, as opposed to the G prime transition and the G prime at the end of aging study. With the knowledge of G prime in the aging experiment, we can relate it using the naive mode coupling theory as proposed by Shen and Schweizer, and it can be related to the localization length, and using the values already computed experimentally, we now estimate the value of localization length and plot it as a function of extent of depth. As it can be expected, as we go deeper and deeper into the arrested state, which is at deeper quench depths, we have lower values of localization length because the system is getting more and more arrested. The microstructure is getting more arrested over here. So therefore, with the knowledge of a bulk parameter, we are able to get insight into the microstructural localization length of the model gel. So with this, we now want to understand what will happen if instead of bringing or quenching the system from a liquid state, we take it from a very arrested state to a temperature. So the schematic is shown on the left, which suggests that we take the sample, we start at 40 degree, take it to the lowest possible temperature for the system, which is 12 degree. And then from 12 degree, we take it to a target temperature. Let's say this is 21 degree in this case. So now the evolution of G prime when taken from a very arrested state to a less arrested state is shown over here. So initially, the temperature changes from 40 to 12 degree. The temperature change is shown in A figure over here. And since the system is transitioning from a liquid to a arrested state, we can see the corresponding increase in the modulus value in the C figure. After this, it is followed by a step jump in temperature from 12 to 21 degree. Since we are moving from a very arrested state to a comparatively less arrested state, we expect the modulus value to decrease, which can be seen in this narrow decrease over here on increase in temperature to 21. And interestingly, even after taking the sample to 21 degree from a very arrested state, it undergoes the similar transition as observed when we took the sample from a liquid state, which is 40 degree directly to 21 degree straight. So on comparing the cooling and the undercooling results in figure D, we can see that both the system undergoes the same transition, which is shown by the drop in modulus value followed by a plateau value. So we now compare the transition time during the undercooling protocol and during the cooling protocol. One which is achieved using while coming from 12 degree to certain temperature, and the other one while coming from 40 degree to a certain temperature. So it can be seen that the values are in close proximity, although it's not identical to both the protocols, but it is still in the close proximity. And this says that the initial temperature does have a role in determining the final transition time of the system. We also characterize the different modulus value at the different stages of transition, which is at the end of aging behavior, the maximum achieved during the aging behavior, and at the point of transition during the cooling and the heating protocol. And it can be seen that the values are pretty much in close proximity, which suggests that although the transition time scales are slightly different, the value of modulus, which is the final value of the arrested state or the transition state, is equivalent in both the protocols. So now with all these rheological results in hand, we now try to analyze our results and understand what might be happening in the microstructure, which gives rise to such interesting rheological results. So we first saw that at temperatures very close to the gel point temperature, there is a continuous increase in value of modulus, which suggests that the system is slowly progressing towards a lower energy well, and it is lying in the gel-like region over here, which is marked by region 1 over here. As we increase the quench depth, we enter into the two-phase region. So in region 2, we saw a sudden decrease in the modulus value, but followed by a continual increase in the modulus value, which suggests that continuous nucleation and growth-like kinetics is happening in the material, and therefore the material can be supposed to lie between the binodal and the spinodal region. With further increase in the quench depth, we enter the region 3, where the sudden decrease is followed by almost constant value of modulus, which suggests a possible mechanism of spinodal decomposition occurring and then having a firm viscoelastic behavior in the gel, which is demarcated by region 3 over here. Finally, when we are at very high quench depths and where the transition and the system is in a very arrested state, it takes a longer time for the system to transition, and therefore the transition becomes more wide and takes around 1000 seconds to undergo the transition, and it has entered into the deep two-phase region, which corresponds to the behavior shown over here. So the microstructure which causes the changes which is occurring while changing the temperature is shown by the schematics over here. So while we are at 40 degree, we are in the liquid-like temperature, which is where the colloidal particles are very nicely dispersed in the medium, and is shown by the red spheres in this box. As we decrease the temperature, it enters the gel-like region where the particles share attractive interaction and forms a very nice space-spanning percolated network, as shown by the purple schematic over here. With further increase in the quench depth, we are entering the two-phase region, and it leads to the formation of colloidal rich and colloidal lean phases, which are ultimately interconnected, which leads to the viscoelastic behavior of the material. And with the deepest quench possible, it leads to more and more densification of the colloidal rich regions, and the interconnection between the colloidal rich regions gives rise to the elasticity which is observed in this behavior. So with the bulk rheological parameters G prime and G double prime, we are able to get an indication of the microstructural changes which is occurring in the material at different stages of aging, and how a homogeneous gel is able to transform itself at the same concentration to a spatially heterogeneous gel using just quench protocol as the independent parameter. So with this already known in hand, we also try to study what happens, what is the approach to the final microstructural state if we come to that state from identical temperature difference. So for example, in the left figure shown over here, if we take the final temperature to be 21 degree and try to achieve it from 30 degree and 12 degree, how does the dynamics differ in both the cases. So as we know, 30° is the liquid like state for this sample, whereas 12° is an arrested state for the sample. So as we transition the sample from 30 to 21, giving a step down and step up increase in temperature, the following evolution is shown in the rightmost curve over here. And we can see in both the transition, in the step up and step down, it undergoes a transition wherein there is a sudden decrease in the modulus, again followed by almost constant value of modulus. In order to quantify how fast or how slow both the process are during the step up and step down, we normalize the modulus value using the final value of modulus and plot it as a function of time over here. And we can see that during the step down, there is a faster dynamics as compared to the slow to the step up dynamics in the experiment. So we believe that the faster dynamics in the step down experiment is because we're coming from a very less restricted state, which is the liquid state, whereas in the step up experiment, we are already coming from a very constrained state to a less constrained state, and therefore the dynamics becomes a more sluggish as compared to the step down experiment. But ultimately, the final state is identical in both the approaches. So in order to summarize this whole work, so we had a system of adhesive hard spheres, which was thermoresponsive in nature. And interestingly, it showed interesting behaviors on subject to thermal quenches, which were deep enough to make it enter the two-phase region, where it undergoes a transition from homogeneous gel to a spatially heterogeneous gels. Now, also we plan, this is an ongoing work, and we plan to do scattering experiments at different in the linear domain as well as in the non-linear domain to see how we can fine-tune this transition and use it to characterize and obtain different microstructures using quench depth as a parameter. So the take-home message from this work is basically that rheological study highlights how quench depth can be used as an independent parameter to fine-tune the microstructure and get different microstructures at identical composition. So the funding for this work was provided by NCNR. And with this, we move to the second part of the talk, which is on universality of the scaling relations during sol gel transition. So we are in the community of soft matter, and we all know Pierre de Jeans, and he had proposed for a chemically cross-linking system while approaching the critical gel transition, the properties like zero shear viscosity and equilibrium modulus to diverge in the vicinity of the critical gel point. So as the system transitions from sol, where the monomers are very nicely dispersed, it begins to cross-link and forms primary cross-links, and with increasing extent of cross-linking, it at a certain state, it forms the percolated network where all the strands connect to form a space spanning network. And eventually after this, as more fractions of cross-linkable monomer units join the unit, it forms a dense consolidated state. So the extent of cross-linking is defined in terms of variable P over here. And he proposed that for a chemically cross-linking reaction, both the values follow a power law fashion over here. Also, the relaxation timescale, the longest relaxation timescale associated with the structure diverges in the vicinity of the critical gel transition. However, till yet, there were no physical or chemical gel to prove all these scaling laws to be true and validate these scaling laws in the literature. So this brings us to the goal, which is to validate all the scaling laws proposed in the literature during the sol to gel transition in a physical gel. So firstly, we select a good model system for this study, which is a suspension of laponite particles. So laponite is a synthetic clay-like particle with the unit cell formula given over here. So these are disc-shaped particles with around 25 to 30 nanometers in diameter and 1 nanometer in thickness. So on dispersion in water, water enters into the interlayer gallery, and the sodium ion dissociates into the water, rendering it a negative phase charge, whereas the edges acquire a positive phase charge. Due to the charge anisotropy on each particle of laponite above a weight percent of 1, it undergoes, it tends to form edge-to-face attractive interaction, which gives rise to a percolated network as seen in the cryochem image of laponite dispersion. So the dark black lines are basically each laponite particles, which can be seen to be very well connected, leading to a space-spanning percolated network, which is highlighted by the red line over here. Also, laponite is a widely used system in industrial products like paints and consumer care products, and as it's widely used in the industry, therefore it becomes important to study this system. So with this system in hand, we try to first characterize the sol to gel transition. And as I mentioned previously, it can be very well characterized using the winter criteria. So we apply again a series of frequency sweeps. The difference between the first system, which was system of spheres, and this system is that the earlier one was a thermoreversible system, which means that it undergoes transition with respect to temperature, whereas laponite undergoes spontaneous gelation, that is, it undergoes transition with respect to time. So over here, we do multiple frequency sweep experiments at different times during its transition from sol to gel state. And we can see initially at lower times, we have the liquid-like behavior shown by the terminal scaling. And with increase in time at a particular time, we have identical power law behavior of both the moduli. So this time can be therefore characterized as the critical gelation time of the laponite dispersion studied in this work. Also, corresponding tan delta evolution is shown on the right curve, and we can see that at the identical time, the tan delta curves corresponding to different frequencies become independent of the applied frequency, and it leads to the estimation of the critical gelation time. So with the value of tan delta over here, one can estimate the value of delta, and the delta can be related to the relaxation exponent n using this formula, and we can compute the value of n to be 0.29. So the value of n computed using this scaling, using this law and using the power law behavior of both the moduli is identical, which is 0.29. This is going to be a very important parameter because it relates all the major bulk rheological parameters, and we will see how it happens. So with having characterized the gel point time of laponite dispersion, we now plot complex viscosity, which is eta star, as a function of frequency. So this is no new experiment done over here. It's the same experiment which was done at multiple frequencies. It's just plotted in a new fashion. So complex viscosity eta star is given by the rheometer. We collect the data and plot it as a function of frequency right now. Now the law was proposed, the scaling laws were proposed for zero shear viscosity and equilibrium modulus. Now in order to estimate those parameters, we use complex viscosity as a function of frequencies to get those parameters. So in the pre-gel region, we have the low frequency asymptote, and we can see the value of complex viscosity to achieve a plateau value. And this plateau value is nothing but the zero shear viscosity in the pre-gel region. In the post-gel region, the equilibrium in the post-gel region, the complex viscosity increases with a slope of -1, which is the lower frequency asymptote. And so we draw the low frequency asymptote at the post-gel region. And with the help of these asymptotes, we estimate the equilibrium modulus. So now we have estimated zero shear viscosity and equilibrium modulus in the pre-gel and the post-gel region. Now with this asymptotes, the low frequency asymptotes drawn, we intersect it with the critical gel state line, which is a power law behavior with an exponent of n-1, n being identical to 1 observed in the previous slide using the winter criteria. The intersection of this leads to some value of omega. The inverse of this omega value gives us the longest relaxation time scale of the material in the pre-gel and in the pre-gel and the post-gel state. So now this is an important diagram, which is using a single parameter, a single experiment, which is doing multiple frequency sweep experiments, and using eta star value at different frequencies, we are able to get 4 parameters, which is eta naught, GE, and the tau max, the longest relaxation time scale in the pre-gel and in the post-gel region. So having quantified these 4 parameters, we plot it as a function of different times during the sol-gel transition. The dashed line over here is the point of critical gel transition. So what was proposed in the literature was for chemical gels, and it was proposed to follow a power law scaling law in the pre-gel and in the post-gel region with respect to extent of chemical cross-linking. Now, we have a physical gel in hand, and also the extent of cross-linking can be interpreted in terms of time of transition, because aponite dispersion is known to undergo spontaneous transition, which means that with increase in time, it undergoes transition. So we tried to propose replacing the extent of cross-linking, the chemical extent of cross-linking, with time in these sample over here, and we write these scaling laws in terms of time over here. And with this, we try to fit the scaling laws in the parameters which we quantified from the experiments, and we can see that these power law fits very nicely to the experimental data, and we quantified the different power law exponent with which the zero shear viscosity, the equilibrium modulus, and the longest relaxation time scale in the pre-gel and the post-gel region evolve. So all of these are very nice power law exponents, power law scaling laws shown over here. So with this exponent in hand, we use the laws of linear viscoelasticity, and using the laws and doing some mathematical calculation, we end up with this simple hyperscaling laws, which is relationship between many exponents. So n is being the relaxation exponent, and these parameters being the exponent with which the viscosity and relaxation timescale evolved in the pre-gel state. So with this hyperscaling laws in hand, we calculate the value of relaxation exponent in the pre-gel, which is S, and in the post-gel, the G region. And we calculate it to be identical to 0.29, which was independently obtained in the oscillatory experiments. So such a validation of 0.29 using the scaling laws and using independent oscillatory experiments confirms that our hypothesis of using time instead of chemical cross-linking extent is validated, and also the estimation of these exponents is correct. So with this, we also have another advantage, that is it can lead to superposition of complex viscosities. So in the pre-gel region, we did experiments at different times, and now we can superpose all those data using the different parameters, and it all gets superposed very nicely into two master curves over here, one corresponding to the pre-gel region and the other corresponding to the post-gel region. The very fact that it gets superposed very nicely suggests that the shape of the relaxation time spectrum remains preserved independently in the pre-gel state and the post-gel state, due to which we are able to get a very nice superposition over here. So now the power of rheology is that by doing a simple experiment in narrow window of frequency, we are able to get data in a wide range of frequency by doing a superposition over here. So in order to summarize this work, what we started with was a theoretical proposal already existing in the literature, but there wasn't any system which could validate all the scaling and the hyperscaling laws and experimental determination of the same. So we selected a system, did some characterization, rheological characterization, which led us to the estimation of the parameters during the sol to gel transition, and we were able to very nicely verify and validate all the scaling and the hyperscaling laws, which is equivalent to understanding how the microstructure develops in a colloidal gel at different stages of sol to gel transition. So the take-home message from this entire talk is basically on designing a very careful rheological study, one can lead to understanding the microstructural changes in the system, not only in the colloidal gel, but in soft matter in general. And this can lead to very interesting features, and also gives us some useful information to design more integrate studies like scattering studies in general. So therefore, I promote to use rheology for understanding the behavior of complex matter and complex fluids and soft matter in general. And this work was funded by DST SOB India. So with this, thank you all for joining this talk, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Very nice talk, very systematic. So in the audience, please just unmute yourself if you have question. I don't think it will cause chaos because we don't have so many audience. So you can just unmute yourself if you have a question. Maybe since they are thinking, I will start with a simple one.
Sure.
So maybe I missed the point. And for the first part of your talk, and you take a particular volume fraction of 20%. Is there a special reason why this is the focus of your work in the first part?
Yeah, thank you for pointing out that. So why do I present the results for a volume fraction of 0.2? There is no specific reason for choosing that. It's just concisely presenting the results. I repeated the experiments for different volume fraction till I went up to 0.4 volume fraction, and I get the systematic decrease or drop in the modulus value. So it happens at different volume fraction as well. So it is not specific to a specific volume fraction. It's just the way of presenting. I restricted myself to present only for one system so that I can cover more parts.
I see. I have another small one. And
Yes.
just I saw many in the first part of your work, many of the results are still based on rheological measurement of rheometry. So
Yes.
you measure the G prime, G double prime.
Mhm.
Does it make any sense to really look at the microstructure in the gel? Like, for example, I think you have access to the neutron scattering or other facilities, right, at hand. Does it make sense to do that for this system?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to gain the insight into the microstructure by actually doing scattering study, and I am happy to share that we have an approved proposal also at NIST and Oak Ridge to do the same. We are waiting for the reactor startup, and then we are all ready with the sample and the design of the experiment to gain insight about what actually the microstructure is. So I also mentioned it in one of my slides that specifically in the region 4, which is the most frustrated region, we anticipate it might be entering or entering into the deep glass region, and how the microstructure actually is can be known from the scattering study in general. So therefore, using the rheological study, we come to know about many interesting features, and it can help us to design the more integrate experiments, which is the scattering studies. So we are up to doing scattering studies, and hopefully we'll have a publication soon on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Last question. So
Sure.
I will give to others later. So since I'm actually a computational guy, I'm doing simulation all the time. Very few experiment I did in the last few years, mainly simulation. So do you see any relevant work, or do you see any obstacle in this context of your first part of work of gel to simulate this kind of system? Or do you think any insight in extra you can gain from simulation, if it would be meaningful to do it at all?
I think it will be really meaningful and informative to have a simulation study which can help us understand the different intricacies of transition which is occurring at different levels of quench depth. But it is difficult for me to understand how to incorporate that in simulation study. Maybe you can help that better. But if we can somehow formulate and in the simulation that how at different changes in the extent of quench depth, it is leading to different fine-tuning the transitions like this. Sometimes it is sudden, sometimes it is gradual, sometimes it is followed by a steep increase, sometimes it is plateauing out. It'll be really nice to understand with the help of simulations how maybe the bond, the contacts of one particle with the other particles are changing. If the number of contacts are increasing, how it is decreasing. That information will be really helpful from the simulation. So I really look forward for the collaboration.
From the perspective of computation, it's tough to do when it's very concentrated. Actually, the 20% of solid fraction is kind of a comfort zone for simulation, because you don't have many. I did, for example, hard spheres in suspension, where you have a lot of lubrication forces in between. But once the concentration goes up to 30%, 40%, it's very hard to move on the system, because the integration time step is so stiff. You have to use very expensive and small time step to integrate the system. So wait long time to do. It looks like 20% to me, as a simulation guy is very comfortable, but I don't know actually by introducing these attractive forces, how much trouble we're gonna get. But this we have to somehow verify and see how it does affect the simulation. But anyhow, I think it really provide a lot of insight also for opening new ways for our computational people to try a new system. Thanks a lot. And
Yeah,
I
thanks
will
to
ask
you.
my student to look into these papers and try to maybe, build up a simulation code to mimic some of the behavior you already observed. Then maybe I contact you again later. Okay.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that information. So I was not aware that 20 volume fraction is a very comfortable volume fraction for simulation. So next time when someone asks me why I'm presenting for 0.2, I should be giving this answer as well. And yeah, I look forward for successful collaboration. It'll
Thank
be
you.
really
Thank you
wonderful
again.
to study that. Thanks to you
Okay,
for giving me this.
let's give some time to other people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so following Shin's question, I think that another challenge is in the experiment they're using the coding the coding of the surface of the nanoparticle surface, and this actually is not a hard sphere. It's so for hard sphere we actually know how to model the nucleation force between the hard sphere, but if you consider this soft surface, it's coated surface, how to describe the soft interaction is another big challenge. Nobody know how the interaction between soft surface looks like. I think the 20% volume fraction is not a big challenge for computation, but how to reasonable model the soft interaction would be a huge challenge for modeling part.
Yeah, it can be one of the challenges, but also in the literature, like Thor and Horpe have done simulations for adhesive hard spheres, and they found the rigidity percolation line where the number of contacts of each particle is found to be 2.4, and it can be seen that this system of adhesive hard sphere follows that rigidity percolation line, which suggests that it is quite close to the adhesive hard spheres. So I think maybe we can draw some analogy and then try to simulate things just as a starting step to get things easier and then go into more complicated things.
Yes. So can I ask a question? So in your slides 9, so
Okay.
you describe. Yeah, maybe you want to switch your screen. Now your screen is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The 9. So you describe there is a symmetric cooling and heating loading, but the rheology behavior is not quite consistent. And do you know what's the underlying reason to generate this difference, that the cooling and heating curve is too different?
So the question is why the heating and the cooling curve are different and not on top of each other.
Yeah.
Right. So it's firstly, it depends on the initial and the final state of each cycle which we are starting at. So when in the cooling cycle, we are starting at a higher temperature, which is the liquid state, and it follows a certain curve. While increasing the temperature, the system is ideally not able to undergo the same transition or the same arrangements, the rearrangement which it went through while the cooling cycle. And therefore, there is a little hysteresis in the value of the bulk modulus as seen over here. So basically, the rearrangements which the particle undergoes is not identical in both the cycles, which is resulting in the little bit difference in both the intersection value and the modulus value in both the cycles. And also, since in the cooling cycle, since it is coming from a liquid state, it's easier to transition in the soft solid state. Whereas when it is coming from a more constrained soft solid state, which is in the heating cycle, it takes a longer time to transition from a more constrained to a less constrained system, and therefore the transition shifts to higher temperature, which is why instead of 25.9 we see it at 27.2. So the initial state at which we are starting the transition matters a lot in the transition, because it is not following the identical rearrangements during the transitions. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. So as my understanding, it's the local relaxation. There's a local relaxation time for the local structure to relax to a new state, right?
Yeah.
So for high temperature, it's maybe it's different with the local structure for that. So this is the kind of material memory, right? So it's history dependent process. It's not just the transient state can determine how it evolve.
Yeah, and this can be eliminated or can be reduced by doing more and more slower step, or doing more, equilibrating it more at a specific temperature, and then we can decrease this temperature gap. So if we do it at a very fast temperature ramp rate, the difference of the hysteresis is going to be more pronounced as compared to when we do it in a very slow and equilibrated step. It's going to be quite less. So it can be minimized using equilibration in time and temperature.
Okay. Another question related to this kind of behavior, rheology behavior is, have you try to change the coating thickness, because you need to stabilize the system. Usually you use 1 or 2 nanometer surface coating surface. Have you tried to change it? For example, I make the thickness bigger. What's is this the thickness of the surface coating will significantly change the rheology behavior of the system?
Yes, I think the thickness might change the rheological behavior. At this point, I have not explored the change in coating thickness on the rheological behavior, because this itself was a very new and interesting phenomenon. And this is what I'm presently doing. And there's a lot to see on this. How can it be more fine-tuned? How rates can affect on this? So that is what I'm doing on presently. But what if we change the thickness? How is it going to affect the rheological results? So what I can anticipate is, with if I increase the octadecanol chains, which is on the spherical particles, there has to be certain transition, or it has to interdigitate such that the attraction is able to lead it to more and more attractive state, such that it enters the two-phase region. So we know in the vertical axis we had increase in the attraction strength. So the attraction strength between the two chains of two particles should be strong enough so that it can lead to more and more lower states of energy. So if that is happening with increase in the thickness of the coating, then we expect such behaviors to be more and more pronounced with increase in the coating of the octadecanol on silica particles, is what I can expect, but it is not something which I have explored right now.
Okay, thank you. So for the second part, I have a simple question.
Yeah.
For you're trying to find the universal law, or the law consistent with the theory. I'm wondering if this universal law only exists for solid, for the hard particle, or also you can find a similar universal law for the coated particle or soft particle system.
So the second part of the talk was on scaling laws, which is proposed for a system undergoing sol to gel transition. So if we have a soft system which is also undergoing sol to gel transition, which shows the signatures of of critical gel transition with this identical scaling laws, and therefore if it is showing those transitions, we'll be able to validate the scaling laws, because these scaling laws is universal in the nature, which means that it is not subject to what kind of gel we have. It is not subject to whether it is a chemical gel, whether it is a physical gel, whether it undergoes transition with respect to temperature, time, concentration. We can interpret the extent of cross-linking in terms of either time temperature or concentration, depending on what drives the gelation in the system. So if we have a soft matter system which is undergoing sol to gel transition with this critical gel transition, and we have measurable properties of zero shear viscosity, equilibrium modulus, we should be able to validate all these scaling laws. So right now I showed only for one kind of system. I have also done it for a polymer system, which is a system of polyvinyl alcohol, and which undergoes temperature thermoreversible gelation, and that is also very nicely obeying all the scaling laws. So that system is quite different from Laponite because it is a spontaneously gelling system, and the polymer one was with temperature. So both obeys the scaling laws.
Okay, thank you. It's very nice to know this scaling law works for any gel system. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I have a question. Oh.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm wondering what you think the role is of rotational dynamics on the restructuring of your system and the deep quench. And if you were to make a hard sphere attractive system via depletion interactions, do you think you would see the same behavior, which wouldn't have such restricted movement to rotation?
So the depletion system is quite different from the system which I'm observing, which I'm studying, which is the adhesive hard spheres. So let me first state that the phenomenon which are reported in the first part of the work, which is sudden change in modulus value, is not a universal thing. It's very specific to this system. Obviously, it happens at different concentration, but it is not something which is usually seen for any polymeric or any colloidal system. So we tried it for different polymer system standard solution. Obviously, we get a very slow continuous increase in the modulus value, and this interesting behavior is very specific to this system. Now, the second point, depletion gels are very different from these gels because in depletion gels, we commonly do not have the really contact or the rigid contacts which leads to the gel-like structure. So I'm not sure if in depletion gels we'll observe such kind of change in response of the material with change in quench depth, because in the depletion gels we do not have direct contact acting in the system. So if the question is if rotation is going to affect, how it is going to affect the microstructure in depletion gels. So firstly, I believe this won't occur in depletion gels because of its own properties of depletion gel. It might have some other interesting feature, but this specific phenomena won't be visible in depletion gel is what I believe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, I think. So you're saying probably wouldn't be observed because it wouldn't behave like an adhesive hard sphere system.
Yeah, and it won't be that arrested that it undergoes a phase, phase separated and forming a colloid rich and colloid lean phases in case of depletion gels, because ultimately it's very viscoelastic in nature. As we saw, even after the drop in viscous modulus value, it saturates to a high value of modulus. It's not like going to very low value of modulus. So it needs to have a firm elastic strength, elastic network, which gives rise to that such viscoelastic nature of the gels. So I believe this will be absent in depletion gels, although you can try and let me know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? So if not, here we're late. Let's thank Dr. Suma again. It's a very nice talk. We keep in touch. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I
very
got
much.
to learn a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Suma.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
I'll stop sharing. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.